Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And I'm going to go into the share. Sorry, let me do that. So we are reading about mincha offerings, meal offerings, brought along with a Todah offering. And I confess that I don't feel like I have a complete and utter understanding of everything that's going on here, but I will do the best I can. And I have actually done some work to try to get a better understanding of what this is about, or at least the measurements and stuff. So let me go back a little bit so we have the context, right? So we're in Parsha Tzav. It's the second Parsha of Leviticus, and what it does is it gives more details regarding the offerings that are mentioned in the Parsha of Vayikra that we read last week. So here, and they introduce it by saying Zot Torat, right? So this is the instruction, Zevach HaShlamim, of the Shlamim sacrifice. The sacrifice, the Shlamim sacrifice, was such unique in the sense that part went up on the altar, part went to the priests, and part went to the family that brought it. And so the Shlamim was the only offering, or subcategories of Shlamim, where the family also partook of the offering too. So here we go. He says, here's a specific kind of Shlamim called a Todah. And Rashi, last year when we did this, we read the Rashi and we read about the circumstances, the four circumstances by which one brings a Todah offering. One is if one has on a sea journey, a successful sea journey, a successful land journey. Think of the context back in the times when this was being promulgated, recovery from an illness, from a very serious illness, or being able to come out of jail. And those are the four circumstances which today we bench gomel. We've kept this tradition in a way, this practice by benching gomel, because we don't bring sacrifices, animal sacrifices, because the temple is destroyed. So this is so here we go. The hikriv al zevach hatodah, he should offer up on the when he brings this Todah offering, this Thanksgiving offering. Here's what we're really dealing with now. Chalot matzot, so unleavened cakes or unleavened loaves, lulot bashemen, that are mixed with oil, urikikei matzot, and wafers, unleavened wafers, meshuchim bashemen. We actually read about this and studied about this specifically last week when we were looking at the mincha offering. So this is that is wiped with oil, the solet murbechet. And this is what we're talking about is fine flour, and murbechet means that it is it's saturated with water. Chalot blulot bashemen, and also that they're loaves that are that are soaked in oil. So then that's as far as we got last time, and now we're picking it up with al chalot lechem chametz, together with loaves that are made of leaven, that are leavened. So interesting, because when we were reading about the menachot before in last week, it was very specific about them being that they should have no leaven in them. But when you brought a Todah offering, here we have the idea of these loaves being leavened. We had mentioned last time that the major context in which one sees leavened loaves or leavened cakes has to do with Shavuot, the festival of Shavuot, where there's a communal offering that is leavened. Yakriv Korbano, he should offer his offering, he should bring his sacrifice, al zevach, on the offering, Todah Shlamav, on the Thanksgiving offering that is a Shlamim offering. You can see here that in the sentence, the wording is quite, if I may say, tortured or convoluted, and so in itself, this verse really screams out for interpretation. So I'm going to do the best I can in terms of understanding this as Rashi attempts to explain this this verse, right? So, Yakriv Korbana al Zebach. He should bring his sacrifice on his offering on the sacrifice. Zevach is a verb that is used in terms of slaughtering an animal, but it's used specifically in a sanctified context and not shchita, which is the word that we use when you are killing an animal, slaughtering an animal for personal consumption. So, Magid. So this tells you, she'ein halechem. This is interesting, as you'll see, an interesting inference that he gets. Kodesh kedushat haguf. So what does that mean? Let me go back here. Magid. So we're saying that this bread is not ein, she'ein. It's not sanctified, kadosh, kedushat haguf. Kedushat haguf means intrinsically. In other words, that the holiness of this bread, the sanctification of this bread, is not intrinsic, lipasel, in order for it to become unusable, unfit, beyotze, utvul. Beyotze refers to if it is taken out of the sanctuary area. In other words, if it's taken out of the temple courtyard or that precinct, if that bread is taken out of that precinct, it doesn't become unusable now. Utvul yom. This has to do with someone who is in a process of purification. We've talked about this concept before. Tvul yom means someone who has gone to the mikvah. Okay, he's gone to the mikvah, but he still has to wait for the rest of the day. In other words, he went to and immersed himself in order to become purified, but his purification is not complete yet. And so there's a level of impurity that he still has. And if he touches this bread, it does not again become impure. Okay. Umilatset lechulin pidyon. Okay. So I believe that Rashi means here that it is not in a situation where it can be redeemed for personal use. Chulin means non-sanctified. That's the word that we use for a non-sanctified day. So there's kadosh, sanctified, and chol. We don't have a unique word in English. Chol means unsanctified. So it's not, since it doesn't have the level of sanctity to be redeemed, because in some cases you can take an object that is sanctified, meaning that it's devoted or it's dedicated for temple use alone, and you're able to redeem it for personal use by paying the value of it plus an added fifth, which is actually an added 25% in this case. Befidyon, through redemption, ad sheishchat hazevach, until the animal is actually slaughtered. That is, the offering is actually slaughtered. So this, of course, in itself, while this is an explanation, it also begs explanation as to how this is all derived. But that goes to a level of interpretation that we're not ready for at this particular point. So It's just that we need to understand that this particular scriptural verse is explaining quite a bit of detail regarding the lechem, the meal offering, the mincha that goes along with the offering of the animal. So, gonna go on. Vehikriv mimenu echad mikol korban, and he should offer up from it one from every sacrifice. And here we are still talking about the loaves. So there were actually 20 loaves so there were, I believe, five different loaves, each of 2 omer or 2 isarons each. Okay. And so there were a total of 20. And so 10 of them, it sounds here that 10, well, actually, I think there were 10 of each. And then 1/10 went up when he says one from each offering. So there were 5 loaves, and trying to think of how this worked out. But essentially, he would take one of each loaf, 1/10, truma lashem, as a gift to God, la kohen, to the priest, hazorek et dam hashlamim, who actually sprinkles the blood of the shlamim sacrifice. Lo yiyeh, it shall be for the priest. So let's take a look and see. Here we go. Echad mikol korban, one of each offering. So, lechem echad mikol min bamin, meaning one loaf from each and every type of mincha that he's bringing. Yitol truma lakohen, he should take it as a gift to the priest, ha'oved avodata, who is involved in bringing this offering on his behalf. And one of the things that the priest would do in once the offering was slaughtered is they would take the blood and then offer it up on the altar. There was a specific way in which the blood had to be put on the altar. V'sha'ar ne'echal laba'alim, and the remaining loaves would be eaten by the owners, the people who brought the loaves. Uvisara, and it's leva'alim, and also the meat of the offering would go to the people who brought it, who donated the offering. Chutz michazeh v'shok, with the exception of the breast and the thigh, sheba, which was in this offering. And we have read elsewhere, kamof shemoforash lamata, as will be explained below, these 2 parts of the animal went to the priest. Tnufa chazeh v'shok, this was a wave offering. They would take the brisket and the thigh and raise them up, lift them up as an act of offering and wave offering bishlamim, with the shlamim sacrifice. V'hatodah kruya shlamim, and the Todah offering is also referred to as a shlamim sacrifice, the way the Todah was brought. And I know we're getting into a lot of detail here regarding the offering itself. I think it is so important to never forget that the idea behind this was that one was offering up oneself, that this was coming as a symbolic act of dedicating oneself to God, and to be able to do it in as physical a way as one could. So there were various circumstances in which one might want to do this. And again, remembering that the greatest gift you can give anyone is yourself. So, going on, and so here, as I said, in Parshat Tzav, we are starting to go into the specifics of how each offering was actually brought up. And again, in studying this, even though it may seem so irrelevant, its relevancy has to do with the idea of dedication And that in dealing with these details, in some ways, because even though the temple no longer exists and there's no longer an actual system of sacrifices physically taking place, that in studying them, we aren't neglecting them, and that in some ways studying them has almost as great a validity as actually performing them. So there's also sort of a ritual element to what we're doing here in becoming more understanding and in learning about these particular things. And even if we may not understand and appreciate the beauty and the profound nature of this, it's a start. It's a start. And as you start to become more educated about these sorts of things, we become also a little bit more appreciative of what's going on here. At any rate, going on. Uvasar, and the meat, right? Zevach Todat Shlamav, of the offering of his thanksgiving Shlamim. Beyom Korbano Ye'achel, it should be consumed on the day of its bringing, of your bringing it. Lo yaniach mimenu ad boker. He should not leave over any of it until morning. So essentially, he had the family who was consuming those parts of the offering that went to the family had a part of its sanctification was how it was treated in a very special way, in that they had to consume as much of it as they could. If they couldn't eat all of it, if it was a large family, they might be able to consume the entire amount. But anyway, after the next day, in other words, after the next daybreak, it could not be eaten anymore. Very similar, by the way, to the Pesach, which we have as a very similar kind of offering. And again, in treating this way, and there was a way of saying how very special this is. And I think to this day, there's probably a universal sense that when you offer people leftovers, there's a certain disrespect involved in offering people leftovers. Now, of course, there are exceptions. You can say, when people are very close to you, when it's the family, etc. But in terms of showing respect, giving them fresh food and stuff that isn't leftovers, there's all, as you sort of analyze what it is about leftovers that is disrespectful, you realize, because having that opportunity to taste something for the first time when it's fresh is an honor. Let's take a look. Rashi, uvasar, and the meat, zevach todah shlamav, of this particular shlamim offering of the todah. That's a shlamim. By the way, other shlamim can be eaten for a little longer. Okay, but this is one of the issues of sacrifice, is the amount of time you take to consume it, right? And he's referring to a tractate called Zvachim, page 36, and in the Torat Kohanim, that's a midrash on the book of Leviticus. Yesh kan yiruvuyin harbe. He says there again in this particular sentence, or these sentences, there are many words that are unnecessary that come to include other halachot, right? Lerabot, so it comes to include hatat, so that we know that this also it also applies to a sin offering, the asham, and a guilt offering, the ayil nazir, and a Nazirite who brought a ram as part of his completion of his Naziriteship, the Chagigat Yodalid, and this is referring to this isn't the Pesach, but the Yodalid refers to the 14th of Nisan, means 14, Yod 10 and 4, and it's talking about additional offerings that would have been brought on festivals, but the specific additional offering that was brought Erev Pesach, sheyihiyu nechalim, that they all need to be consumed layom valayla, one day and the night following. Beyom korbano ye'achel, this is of course from the verse, On the day of its offering up, it shall be consumed. Ukizman basara zman lachma. And Rashi points out that just as the meat is designated in this verse specifically, that it can only be consumed the day and the night following, likewise the bread that accompanied the offering also is limited to consumption the same day and that night. And this is again, it's expounded out from the words from words that seem unnecessary, redundant here. He doesn't tell you which ones. He's simply telling you how we need to understand the laws involved here. Lo yaniach mimenu ad boker. He should not leave over any of it until morning. So my understanding is that just like with the Pesach, if there were anything left over that couldn't be consumed in that time frame, it was burnt. It was burnt. And there were rules about where it got burnt, etc., etc. Aval ochel hu kol halayla, but he is able to eat the entire night. In other words, it's only, he has until morning. It's only from morning that he's not allowed to eat anymore. He can eat it the entire night. He's got the entire night to eat it, according to the Torah here. Im kain, but if this is the case, lama amru ad chatzot, when we study the laws in the Mishnah about how long he has in which to eat the parts of the sacrifice that he needs to eat, they said he's able to eat it until midnight. And the reason why the sages, this is a typical example, or maybe a classic example of rabbinic law. In other words, in creating a fence around the Torah, it is being done in order to distance a person from transgression. In other words, if we were to take it literally, the problem is human nature. And when you have more time to do something, you tend to procrastinate. And so there's a possibility that you would procrastinate and leave more over than if you knew you only had until midnight to do this. So that's the idea of the fence. The fence around the Torah, that metaphor, is there to help you fulfill the words of the Torah and not wind up, given human nature as to what it is, to transgress the words of the Torah. And this is a classic example. Onwards. So now we go into a new type of offering. For im neder, this is again, if a person takes an oath, all right, or nedava, likewise a gift offering. The difference between a neder and a nedava is, with a neder, you say, I swear, I take an oath to bring a lamb, okay, or some specific offering that you're going to bring. In other words, the broad or oath of doing the activity. A nedava is the specific animal. When you say, hare zeh, this particular animal I'm offering up. So the way they mention it in the halacha is a neder is hare alai, I take upon myself. They're both forms of oaths, right? That you're swearing that you're going to do a specific activity. But the first case, a neder, is hare alai, I myself am obligating myself to bring an offering, whatever it's going to be. Or nedava, that's a specific hare zeh, this particular object is going to be donated. If it is one of these kinds of situations, zevach korbano, the offering that he's bringing up. Beyom hakrivo, here we go, on the day, since we're discussing the amount of time you have in which to consume an offering, so we're talking about another kind of offering here, another situation, another circumstance. Beyom hakrivo etzivcho ye'achel, on the day when he actually brings his offering, it shall be consumed. Umi mochorat, Okay, and the next day. So it isn't limited just to the day and the night following. You have, in fact, until the next day, through the next day, v'hanoter mimenu ya'achel, what is left of it he can consume. Okay. So it actually goes on. I'll take the next verse just to finish this. V'hanotar mibsar hazavach, and that which is left over from the meat of the offering, Bayom Hashlishi Ba'esh Yisaref. Here it is, where it tells you that on the third day it must be burnt with fire. It must be the remnants are in fact burned. So I'm going to stop here, and we have a Rashi to look at tomorrow, God willing. And so I'm going to put this up here, and we will take a quick look at it again and look at what Rashi has to tell us about this. And I'm going to stop the share with that. Any thoughts or comments for the record before I stop our recording? Yes.
I have a comment. Okay. I have a comment, Rabbi. We have different things on we have purification, which is for sin. Then we have reparation. Then we have thanksgiving. Then we have well-being. Then we have the gifts in order of real, in order of purification, all the way down to the last order of the gift. Now, these different things are different ways of God said to do these things. Purification is different than reparation. Reparation is different than thanksgiving. Now, when I went to Israel and I came back, there's a prayer in the book about the danger that I was in, and they prayed that I got back safely. I don't know where the prayer is, but it's near the Almeida. And you can
Gomel, and Rabbi talked about that in class.
Yeah, he did. So, when on the Thanksgiving prayer on the danger, if you can only eat it on the day, because a miracle happened that day to you. The next day, another miracle will happen. So you got to eat it on that same day, and because the next day is another miracle for somebody else. So that's part of it. And then the gift item is you can eat the meal but the third day you have to throw it away. There's different things on different ways of purification, reparation, Thanksgiving. They have different things to do on each one.
So do you have a question? Is there a question there or not?
Yeah, my question is what are the when are the priests I think on this particular Parsha, isn't there anointment of these priests?
Okay,
I can't remember.
Okay, yeah, Harlan. So the Parsha is divided into two major sections. The first section is the one that deals with the specifics of the various offerings, and the second half of this Parsha deals with the installation of Aaron and his sons into the priesthood. We read back in Exodus about what was to happen, the commandments, but here in Leviticus, we read about the actual experience where Aaron and his sons are initiated into the priesthood. So if I'm understanding you correctly, that's they're two specific and different subjects. Okay, yeah. David, you have a question or point?
Yeah, but it's probably going to take longer than available for today. So I'll pick it up tomorrow.
So it's okay. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question, and then when we have to end, we'll end. Let's hear the question.
Yeah, I get my question is more around the general, we've gone through all the specifics here in this, around the sacrifice, etc. But I guess when you said it in the middle of the discussion today that, when you're offering up yourself, right? The sacrifice, but I don't see how, other than, the rituals associated with it, and, maybe the environment around it, a person doesn't have a connection to an animal. So unless it's some, an animal you raised, you're fond of, becomes a part of you. But I don't think that, that didn't sound like it was the case. So in this case, how do you really feel that connection, that you've really done anything where you're offering up yourself? I mean, it's more like, you've slaughtered an animal, but there's no attachment to that. So it doesn't feel, we're talking about all the, circumstances surrounding it, but yet I don't understand how you get there, or how, yeah.
All right.
Anyway, that's what I understood your point about offering it up is offering up yourself, but I don't see how that actually takes place during this whole ritual.
Okay.
Kind of like saying there's no attachment to money because you live from that. If animals are your living and that's what you have to offer, that's what to give up one of your animals that you could sell or benefit from its meat or whatever, eat or whatever, that's a sacrifice. It doesn't have to be a pet.
No, but you don't have an emotional attachment though to money. I mean, some people do, but I mean,
You
I
might
understand.
have a life attachment to it.
I'm not talking about, sacrifice in the sense of, yes, if you give up something that you're earning, that's part of your livelihood, yes, that's a sacrifice. It makes something a little harder for you. But as far as offering up yourself, you're not necessarily connected to that animal or that money, right? It makes your life harder. Yeah, you're upset about it, but you're not connected to it. It's not like I've given up. If I had to give up my arm, then I'm sacrificing something, right? I'm going to feel pain as a result of all that, right? And that's truly sacrifice. Anyway, that's my point.
All right, so I will give you two basic answers. One is that we have the example of our patriarch Abraham willing to sacrifice, because of God's commandment, his son Isaac, and the Akedah, which took place on Mount Moriah, where the temple was ultimately built, that he was ready to do that. And God then showed him a ram to take its place. And in that act, God was saying that instead of offering his actual son, he could use an animal to take its place. So every single offering was a reminder of that particular act where there was a willingness to actually sacrifice the most precious thing he had, because Abraham, remember, did not have a child until he was 100 years old. Okay.
Right. I totally get that part.
Okay,
but,
so let me finish. Okay.
Yeah.
Number two, when you brought the animal, you had to lean down on the horns of the animal. In other words, you had to take your hands and place them on the horns of the animal when it was being offered. And in that way, you were far more attached to what was actually happening. So on the one hand, yes, it's different from actually offering up your life. But again, as you I did mention it. God wasn't trying to depopulate the world of Jewish people in bringing the sacrificial system. So it has a lot to do with both an emotional and an intellectual level of understanding what is going on, that you realize that this animal is taking your place. So yes, there had to be a lot of intentionality involved in this particular process. And what it was doing was creating if I may call it, a conduit for you to be able to do that. Because the animal was living and breathing and alive and intelligent, just like yourself. And in some ways, making a sacrifice can be a source of joy when it's an expression of thanksgiving. And in some senses, it is also a matter of sadness and recognizing that you've squandered resources or you've squandered your life when you've sinned, when you've committed sins. So, we can certainly take this up tomorrow, God willing. if you feel, that this isn't a sufficient answer, but essentially it's along these lines that we're looking at it. So I'm going to stop. You're right. It's a very big topic.
Yeah.
But
Sorry.
essentially, no, it's good. It's good. It's important because most people sort of look down on animal sacrifice and don't appreciate, the profound emotional and intellectual level that it actually is talking about. Okay, so thank you. I'm going to stop the recording with that.
I'll see you Wednesday. I won't be